Hello, everybody who is connected already. This is Townsend Fian at the IAB Europe office in Brussels. We have we had 130 people registered to the webinar, so we're going to give people another minute or two, maybe not. I think we'll get started at 3 minutes after 11. So give people another couple of minutes to dial in, and then started. And because there's so many people on, we're muting everyone. It will be possible to raise questions through the question and answer box at the bottom of the WebEx display on your screen. I've gone 11:03 on my PC anyway. We're going to get started. I want to say first who's attending the webinar. So this is essentially IAB Europe internal membership. So the national IABs, a bunch of the committees were invited, as well as members of the board, and also some industry allies. So or other associations in the ecosystem. So we may have the World Federation of Advertisers, the Agencies Association, EACA, some publishers, but it's a closed industry audience. Welcome to the webinar, and thanks very much for dialing in. Two minutes of introduction, and then hand off to Daniel Knapp to present the substance of this white paper. So just to recall, our policy committee started thinking about this earlier this year, sort of January, February, and had wanted to have a snapshot short paper that would capture the contribution of digital advertising to the European economy in some relevant measure. And we had back and forth for a few months about what those measures should be. There's a lot of change in the industry, and IAB Europe hadn't tried to do that snapshot in a couple of years. The last one I think was 2012. So it was really time to do it again. We were looking for 1, 2, 3 numbers that could be a sort of calling card, help EU and national policymakers understand at a glance what's at stake, what the contribution of our industry is, and what the stakes are if the regulatory framework in Europe, mostly emanating from Brussels, of course, if that lands wrong. As you'll hear when in Daniel's presentation, I think IHS has succeeded quite nicely in delivering what we wanted. We have EU-level figures, estimates for jobs, and then gross value add, what I would loosely call a contribution to GDP, but then be quickly corrected by Daniel. There's also a very interesting qualitative reflection in the paper, looking at how digital advertising acts as an incubator of high-end data analytics and other big data digital economy skills that then subsequently deployed elsewhere in the economy. And there's some examples of sectors where that's happening and concrete companies that incarnate that. The paper isn't a piece of original research, but it is based on an extensive literature review of other studies that have been done over the last few years, and both in Europe and the U.S. And the results are estimates or predictions, but academically sound and well justified estimates. They add, we think, something new, trying to capture the size of the digital advertising economy in Europe is something new, and in a way this will open a conversation. We're not saying it's the definitive picture, but it's a good, strong assertion to get a discussion going as well over the coming months. And finally, interestingly, it also the white paper also satisfies another aspiration we've had to lay out an approach that could be reproduced at national level. So it will give us a template that we can turn around and then use to derive national level estimates in the course of next year, if people are interested in this. This was something that was raised at the IAB Global Summit in New York at the end of September, and we didn't have the paper then, but we have it now, and it is indeed going to provide a basis for doing that, which is something quite exciting. So I think we've gotten real value out of the exercise, and now I'll let Daniel Knapp, who is Senior Advertising Director at IHS Technology and who's known to most of you, I'll let him explain exactly what's in the paper. So Daniel's going to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we should have time for some questions afterward. As I said just at the start, everybody's on mute because it's a good number of people, and so if you want to put questions, please use the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring that. Daniel's presentation, and then put the questions on your behalf. We are recording the webinar, so that's for information. And the official launch of the paper, as I said in an email I sent last night, the official launch will be next Tuesday, because putting out a press release and all the other comm stuff on Friday is suboptimal, and that's also to give the national IABs a chance to take a look and turn around the press release and other communications materials. So with that, I would hand over to Daniel Knapp.
I would like today the key findings of this white paper. The detailed argument you can read in text next week. It is quite a complex paper due to the volume of research that we incorporated. So I'll try to reduce complexity a little bit today in the presentation. I'll start by saying that we followed a thorough approach in this paper, where we started by looking at the overall contribution of total advertising to the economy, and then looked into digital. Looked at, in particular, the gross value add metric, which is very similar to GDP, also to job creation. We then move into more qualitative aspects to say, how does advertising beyond this economic measures really help build the digital economy of the future? There's a range of research out there in Europe, but particularly in the US, on how advertising can drive economic value. The problem is that these aren't very well defined. Depending on the study, you have different definitions of what advertising is. Different definitions of, in particular, digital economy. And also have different methods, approaches on how to measure the impact of advertising. Lastly, there's a huge difference between the geographies that those studies cover. Most are single country studies that look at predominantly the US, sometimes UK, Austria, and other markets. So there isn't really a pan-European study for this. And that's our main challenge, and also our main objective, to say, how can we learn from those existing studies? How can we extrapolate those findings to come up with a pan-European or EU 25 measures for the impact that advertising has on the economy? So it is studies both a meta-analysis of existing research, but it's original in the sense that we those findings to the EU 28 and produced our own genuine figures. So let's start with a quick executive summary so you can see the metrics that we're going to provide. From perspective, we saw 46 billion invested in online advertising in 2014. If we look at our ADEX study that we do, publishers active in Europe generate around 30.7 billion. That is, one third of all advertising revenue. In terms of value add, which is a standard measure for the contributing overall economy, similar to GDP, 22 billion are directly attributable to online advertising in the EU 28. But we're going to show you some kind of broader metrics because advertising includes a multiplier effect throughout the economy as you flow through the value chain, what we call indirect effects. And as companies and their suppliers hire and pay employees, what we call induced effects. So if we take this broader perspective, the online advertising to the European economy increases to 113 billion euros. Yes, those which just locate economic activity only with the immediate advertising value chain, they miss something. Firms advertise because doing so leads to increased sales. And these again lead to economic activities outside of the ad value chain. So into account these effects, if you will, the increased value of advertising to the economy stands at 473 billion, or 5% of overall economy in the EU 28. With this environment, we see nearly 1,900,000 European jobs directly supported by online advertising. With this, if we take a similar logic of indirect effects, 1.4 million. If we take these broad ripple effects into account, there are even 5.4 million jobs which are at least funded by advertising. Of course, if advertising disappears, it is not all of those 5.4 million jobs would disappear. There's no causal relationship between the advertising and all of those jobs, but part of them depend either exclusively or partly on advertising. We also see more broadly is that online advertising is a key funding model for other high-growth digital sectors in Europe. And we see that if we look at the media industry more widely and make their revenues. So similar to what we did in ADEX with sizing the online ad market, we did this study as well as we sized the overall digital economy around online video, around publishing, and around mobile. And we see in the study that over half of all online video revenues across all business models in the EU 28 are supported by advertising. Well, the digital revenues of news and magazine publishers is 75% of all their online revenues that rely on advertising. We see an interesting seismic shift in the market as well, where as of 2015, ad models outperformed, outgrew, outsized also paid for ad revenues for the first time. And as I noted in this paper, we also look at more qualitatively at what advertising does to the economy, and the sector is going through a lot of structural change, skills that it nurtures, political skills, digital skills broadly, data-driven thinking and so forth, that allows us to rejuvenate a host of all different industries. To some metrics here, just an introduction to remind everybody that advertising revenue, this is on the top chart, these are our ADEX figures, a publisher-centric perspective, amounted to 31 billion in 2014, and you can clearly see in the chart below how online advertising is quickly a dominant position, and with IHS forecast, and the ADEX results will confirm this, and online advertising will be the largest media category in Europe by the end of 2015. So, environment. How does advertising really contribute to the economy? Not straightforward, and as you can see on the flow chart, indeed there are many different ways to think about how advertising contributes to the economy. And I would like to talk you through each of those directly. So broadly speaking, we can see that advertising, this is overall advertising. We are taking this model of overall advertising, it's fairly established, and translate this to online advertising later. So let me speak about all advertising previously, because this is where the majority of this have taken place. They go directly on digital advertising, and it has helped understand this model in a better way. Let's look at some groups here. The ways in which advertising impact on the economy falls into three groups. We first have ad activities, that is the income produced by the advertising and publishing industries, and their now we have audience-related effects here on the right side. It's by stimulating demand for advertisers' products and sales. And at the bottom, we have across all of this spillover effects of the less tangible mechanisms that can lead other sectors of the economy to be innovative and become more productive. And with these sectors, you can see types of firms, different players that all help generate value for advertising. And so advertisers who have demand for audiences to communicate marketing message with the purpose of generating awareness and sales for their products, obviously. There's either on the right side, that's where spend comes in. Then we have on the other side, we have publishers, which is a term here, and for us, outlets, or everybody who serves audiences by providing content, and advertisers by supplying them with audiences. So publisher means any type of company, from broadcaster to online portal to news publisher and so forth, where audience attention and meet. Well, advertising services are intermediaries, providers which connect demand with audience supply. All firms that create, buy, sell, plan, and manage ad content and delivery. So these intermediaries, which we take into account here, can on behalf of advertisers or on the publishers, or actually on both. Includes ad creative agencies, buying agencies, tech and data vendors. And the money that's spent by advertisers we call spend, and receive as ad sales or ad revenues. And if you look at this chart here, look at the vertical dimension here, you can see those effects I outlined earlier: direct, indirect, induced effects, and spill effects. Where we can see that in some of the economic impact of advertising isn't just limited to companies that are in the direct value chain, whose primary business is advertising. That's what is called direct effects. But they also evolve, if you go one level deeper here, indirect effects. The suppliers, and so on. So for instance, an agency, they might hire a production company to shoot a TV commercial, and the company might in turn hire filming equipment from a specialist supplier. And so on. And all of those activities support the jobs of the employees through this extended, very kind of an ecosystem, who in turn then spend money as consumers themselves and get further economic activity, what we would call use effects here. There are spillover effects, because the effects that are until now are the consequences of an industry service customers, but much more. So if a cosmetics brand, for instance, advertises something, they do it because it leads to increased sales. And directly or indirectly, with positive sentiment, share of voice, or direct sales, and so forth. And this all has its own and complexities, which again is partly dependent on advertising. And so kind of less measurable facts that advertising has, but nonetheless significant. So advertising serves as a key source in the media digital sectors, as I mentioned earlier, and the skill developed within the ad industry also can draw something elsewhere in the economy if someone with such a data-driven thinking, for instance, starts working in a different industry, which I show you at the end of the paper as well. So big is advertising within these framework. If you look at economic studies, you always find these direct, indirect, and induced effects referenced again. We looked at a range of studies, for instance, a 2011 study by the Work Foundation, a 20 Deloitte study, economic study, an IHS Global report for the US, another McKinsey study, how they have measured the contribution of advertising to the economy and also what types of effects they consider. We can really see a diverse picture where very different definitions also lead to different measures. And we try to harmonize this and then extrapolate from those figures. And we hear these are kind of all the different aspects that these studies have covered. So direct footprint of advertising, the ad activities, an extended footprint, and an overall economic impact. We of course the term GVA, gross value add, which is very similar to GDP, and is a measure that allows to add up economic activity. So you add is a firm's turnover minus what pays to its suppliers. So this is something that can be added up without adding up things which would create a non-meaningful metric. So it's fairly similar to GDP, and it's a metric that is often used. So if we look at how would analysis of existing research translate into gross value added jobs. Actually, in Europe, there is, with Eurostat, we have a centralized source that provides at least some data on jobs and the value that advertising creates. And we can take the source data and extrapolate it across these direct services, indirect, extended, and the overall impact based on the approaches that these existing studies have taken up with something that looks like this. So we see the gross value added overall advertising across all the area directly is around 42 billion, and then to something much larger, is around 950 billion to 1.5 trillion, depending on the study that you use. Here, the data points C and D for gross value add have 2 points in there. So this is a minimum and a maximum. We see some studies have more bearish, some have more bullish estimates, and depending on their approach, and we wanted to express this change here. With jobs, we see that in total, we see around 8.1% maximum, if we look at overall impact, 0.1% of all EU employment generated by advertising, or 17.7 million jobs. And you really see that if you narrow the definition further down, the job will be less. When we online advertising, there is really much research that allows us to have. So what we try to do is we try to understand what is the relation of those metrics between overall advertising and online advertising. It makes sense to just share of the metrics similar to the market share of online advertising and express it in this way, or are there other factors at play? And going through more than 20 different company filings, public and private filings, we found that there are different dynamics at play. We see that online is a scale business where you can more people. However, we also see that the online ad value chain is much more complex and diversified than the ad value chain in traditional media. Many more specialized roles in online, from a social media manager to a programmatic expert, which are difficult to consolidate and difficult to replace. So we see in online coming together both the efficiencies of scale, doing more less, and this high specialization and fragmentation of roles, which take together roughly balance each other out, so we can extrapolate from these overall figures here for advertising to how this would look for digital. Or we call it online here. And how would this look like? First, we start by sizing the overall online chain. You see on the left here the data from AdX. This is publisher revenue. In the middle, at the extended ad spend figure, excluding production and creative costs, how much would be in online, and then how much the overall investment, taking all those different bits and pieces together, would be. So ad spend, including production and creative costs, will become to 46.4 billion euros. The figure that can serve as a basis to recreate the value add and also the job approach for online advertising. Yeah, this is how it looks today. So we set out here the column A, as you can see, which is the direct effects just for the publishers, not including the intermediaries. So including the ad intermediaries, we estimate around 900,000 jobs supported by advertising, by online advertising today in Europe, around 0.4% of EU employment. The figure we have from 2013, based on the lag that official figures have. And we don't have it in this study, but due to the growth in online advertising, which is around 3-4 times as high as the growth in traditional media, we can assume this figure will grow over time. With a limited approach, we see 1.4 billion jobs, and if we look at the kind of all the effects, all those broader ripple effects, it is much more. I would recommend taking the figure of 1.4 million jobs as the single figure that is useful. The key thing is that the overall impact is across other industries is something that is often done, but the validity of this approach is contested. So a way to show the overall volume of something, I think it's great to show in a much broader context, but there are drawbacks to this approach, in particular when it comes to measuring the causal contribution of advertising to all this, meaning here relying on if the jobs relying on advertising, if advertising is displayed as a funding model, what happened to those jobs? Would they be funded elsewhere, and so forth? So this is a very complex issue that I've addressed in this white paper, and where there are many different opinions about this. So the 1 in 4 jobs is the figure which so best balance between the breadth of impact advertising has and the kind of methodological rigor with which you can measure this. In terms of gross value add, so how much of the European economy does advertising provide? It's 22 billion direct, and again, if we take a range of figures, depending on the approach of the different studies, it varies between 413 for the extended activities, and they take the very broad account up to 473 billion euros. This is advertising relating to the overall economy. But which regulatory reconfigurations in Europe when it comes to the idea of the digital economy? So what's the relationship to the digital economy? When it comes to the econometric metrics, we use overall economy, because defining digital economy in a way that allows us to quantify the impact on it is incredibly hard. And we also did a meta-analysis on what is the digital economy, how it's being defined, and how is it being measured. And we see again a range of different, often incompatible definitions circling around, and you can see many of those definitions here from several studies, from Boston Consulting Group study, here Dayton in 2012, that's a Harvard study done for IAB US, CD, and a kind of a Tech City UK approach, which was interesting in that it dispensed with conventional methods of getting to it's usually gotten through industry registers and using a big data approach to this, which is much broader, but also much more difficult to vet and scrutinize methodologically. So we see very different definitions, which let us conclude that it's better to look at, from a quantitative perspective, advertising and the overall economy. Yet we don't want to dismiss this idea and the relationship of the digital economy entirely. Our measures of what could subparts of the digital economy be illustrate this. Here we looked at 3 different kind of chains, or 2 different sectors within the digital economy, basically as a measure, revenue across different modes of business models, different modes of funding. You see here on the top left the online video business. A rapidly growing sector expressed in our ad study, but also if you look at the lot of Netflix and other businesses growing across paid-for solutions as well. You can see that despite the often very strongly popularized launch of Netflix and other services, that advertising remains is the core funding model for online video content. The paid-for models concentrated on very large players, where advertising supports both large players, like for instance of national broadcasters, but also smaller niche players, news publishers, and so forth, so contributing to the diversity of the media landscape in Europe. We also speaking about diversity in the journalistic content when we look at the online European newspapers and magazines, what their online news are. So this is all kind of players that have a traditional business model when they move it online, how are the revenues in aggregate balanced in Europe, we see that around 76% is actually ad funded. On the bottom here, we see a seismic shift happening where the funding more content came through revenues. This could either be freemium models or it could be just simple paid-for models. Yet as ad value chain matured, as technology improved, as ad targeting improved, as website mobile revenue much more rapidly in Europe, we now see a shift where for the first time in 2014, mobile advertising overtook more revenues and it's set to grow much faster until 2018. Three examples of how in the broad digital economy, advertising really is a pillar of funding very, very different high-growth media platforms and business models. As I mentioned at the outset of this webinar, there are broader effects that advertising on an advertising has. So for instance, if we look at employment studies, there's consensus that start with digital skills and the analytical and problem-solving skills that this digital literacy entails are very, very hard to come by. You see, for instance, the results of a 2013 study which expressed a shortage of skills in Europe. And we also see as a second point advertising as a breeding ground for skills that transform the overall economy. IT skills and so forth are a great example. See, if you look at some ad tech firms, for instance, that didn't start in digital advertising, but started in entirely different parts of the industries, in finance or library archiving, for instance, they moved into advertising. And in a similar way, business models or technology starting in advertising can move somewhere else. And I think the idea of an ad server is a great example, which more broadly can be used for compensation systems and so forth. I mean, we see outside of the media value chain a very interesting cross-fertilization. If you look at the platform approach, something built by players like you and others, and that this is being taken advantage of with skills from the media ad industry in entirely different environments. But for this, for instance, is Klöckner Eye, which is a platform for the digitization for real-time demand and supply for the steel industries. So you could see it, say, something like programmatic steel, if you will. So these are all examples and indicators. We go in much more detail in the white paper, which show how advertising qualitatively really contributes to re-engineering and paving the way for the broader digital economy beyond what economists usually look at. I'd like to conclude with this and again say that the entire white paper, including definitions, sources, and transparency on all our models, will be available next Tuesday. And if there are any questions right now, and should you have any questions after you have read the white paper, I'm available to you by email as well. And with that, I'd like to pass back to Tony and IAB Europe. Thank you very much.
Daniel, really very interesting explanation. Quite a lot of material to assimilate, which may have contributed to the fact that I actually have not received lots of questions using the Q&A function. But please, people, a few more minutes, and so please, if you do have questions, go ahead and submit them. I have a question about. So thanks for clarifying which number we should use with respect to the different figures for jobs. How about for the gross value add? Do we go for the middle column? Can we sort of confidently use the? I mean, that's quite a big range between. I think it's sort of between 44 and 100, 110, 115 or something. So, where would you? What would be a figure that we can comfortably and defensibly used, when just be at a very high level about white paper for the gross value add.
Back to this, let me just rewind here the presentation.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, it's the.
If we go back to this chart, I think this chart explains a lot of what could be used. It's very clear that the figure, the direct effects, doesn't pay justice to how advertising really works. It excludes all the suppliers and their supplier relationships. So it is intended to include the suppliers and the suppliers of the suppliers as well. As it stands to include these audience-related effects and the extra jobs that are being created or extra value created through these inductive effects. And all these spillover effects difficult to validate. It's a concept that's often used, but I would advise against using that as the single figure that you want to communicate. But if you combine direct, indirect, and induced effects, a figure is very robust. The figure is very defensible, and there's a lot of precedent in the literature to communicate figures that include all those different types of effects. So I'm concluding with that. If we go further again in the presentation, I would go with, this is all advertising, apologies. I would always go with column C in everything. So standard is here, column C for plus, and again column C for the as activities extended. Please note that when it comes to jobs, these are figures. There's only one figure here because there isn't any precedent in Europe for this. But when it comes to gross value add, there's much more literature out there, and the approaches vary a lot. We see a range here. So we can say at minimum it's 44 billion contribution to the economy. Maximum, depending on the approach, it is up to 100, 130. It is actually a range. We can't specify this because we didn't conduct primary research on this. We need to rely on the approaches of different studies. So the 44 certainly is a very conservative approach, and the 113 is, as the figures itself suggests, a more bullish metric. All of those are defensible. The study itself, this is all the studies on which these numbers have been based. So you can really pick what you find is most robust, or actually communicate that range directly.
Perfect. Okay. We have a question from IB Ireland, and it's one I would also have raised. So I said at the beginning, one of the aims was for a hoped for outcome out of this whole exercise was to derive an approach that could be a sort of template for allow us to reproduce at national level. Come up with a solid and say then gross value add estimate in national markets. Does that? Can you confirm that seems doable now? And so what data would you need from the national IABs, and how quickly could we do that? Would that be something we could turn around by the middle of next year, for example, if elected to do it?
Yeah, no. That's a question. That was on jobs. I mean, we have a European figure here, because in our country, there's always, similar to all other studies that as a pan-European organization does, there's of course the question, how far would that conflict with data already published in national markets? We see some markets there are jobs available. For instance, in Germany, there are such figures available. But again, the definition of what are ad-related jobs, or what are some digital, it all varies a lot. So we can translate this approach to national markets, but a key thing would be reconcile with potentially listing in a given market to measure this. What would be really helpful is to come up with a pan-European approach within the forum of IAB Europe on how to a taxonomy of advertising jobs. I think we've had great success in establishing the ad survey as a reference in Europe, and it moved away from just aggregating what national markets put out to a sort of interactive approach where we jointly define what different ad formats are, how you measure them in terms of revenues and so forth. If we roll out something like this that is really robust in Europe, it would be great to establish, for instance, in a first step, a working group within Europe that looks at what can national IABs tap into their member base and how can we harmonize and build a taxonomy of jobs. What has that? It'd be much easier for us to roll this out across markets, also to produce comparative figures on other metrics.
Okay, so a good, potentially interesting project for next year. I have a question from what I imagine is one of the publisher associations listening in. So the question is, from their members, they hear that more than 90% of online revenue is from advertising. I think the figure you presented was 76%. Would you have any idea what could explain the difference between those two figures? It may be hard to do without learning more about what went into the 90% and everything. But have a go.
It's really difficult to see without a source material. I can only say from us, our approach is a mixed approach which relies on publicly listed companies. That's those revenues. It relies on interviews with and larger players. It also relies on databases, tax filings of companies that do not report data. The difference might be it could very well be of how broad, how is our approach, and how broad is the membership of the publisher associations. But if anybody has, if anybody would like to share their figures, I'd be happy to look at this and we're going to reverse engineer different approaches and see where the difference might come from.
So I had a query also about the regulatory policy recommendations in the white paper. So that's something that Daniel didn't touch on, but that is, of course, a critical part of what the policy committee wanted out of the white paper. And the white paper does have some policy recommendations, and those will be those you'll see next week. And in fact, we can send the whole paper to people, I think, on Monday, 24 hours at least before the public release on Tuesday. I don't have the policy recommendations in front of me right now. Daniel, I don't know whether you do or you want to say anything about that. That's sort of our domain. But maybe the essential message is that there are 10 or 12 policy recommendations made in the white paper, and that's that's a very important part of it, and they're referenced also in the executive summary. And I don't know if you have anything else on that point, Daniel.
It is 12 recommendations. I didn't include them here in the presentation because I wanted to focus on the approach we took and ensure that everybody understands and the economic model that we use to generate that data. Yeah, I leave it up to you to circulate those recommendations. And yes, they will be included in the white paper and they follow from the analysis.
Another question is one of the people dialing in is wondering, can you tell us how, let's say, a figure of 1 million, so somewhere between 0.9 and 1.4, compares to other economic sectors? So it's a really nice number. It turns out to be, I guess, a 0.4, was the figure of, proportion of overall EU jobs, but around 1 million sounds really nice. Just off the top of your head, can you compare that with any other sectors, or is that, or would it look any better?
Off the top of my head,
yeah.
But I can look now in our database how it compares. Just the thing is, obviously, we have different. For advertising, a very specific way of setting value-added jobs for this indirect and extended effects, and industries that have different value chains will of course have a different a different set of effects, or a different set of that you need to take into account. So there always is slightly the issue of compatibility. Not every industry has the same. It's not always this kind of two-sided market like in advertising. Not always do you have this rich layer of intermediaries. The amount of suppliers plugging into an industry differs as well, and so forth. So if you take in particular the broader approach, which are nicer and justified if you look at a specific industry, there's always a comparative issue.
Yep. I'm trying to draw up a question that I accidentally missed. So there's another question. Daniel, can you say something regarding the difference of impact that potentially holds back the effect of digital advertising on Europe's economy, as on the one hand, structural issues within the digital advertising market, and on the other hand, regulatory barriers? So would you say anything about, which of those sets of issues probably is the bigger impediment to further growth? I would say that the big regulatory barrier, biggest regulatory barrier we see right now is probably to do with the data protection, around data protection regulation, into stuff that's already on the table or very close to coming in. There may be more things that emerge from the DSM strategy that are helpful, but so as the worst looking element on regulation of data protection would be the ones that are imminent rather than already in place, to a certain degree. It's probably hard to quantify and hard to compare. That's still sort of the worst stuff looks like being in the future, and we're still trying to avoid it in the outreach on the GDPR. Anything about the structural impediments?
Yeah, well, I think let's start with the historical perspective. Europe has grown consistently since 2006. There's never been a year level. Some had exceptions, but at an aggregate level across Europe, of EU 28, online advertising has never declined since 2006. It has grown continuously and consistently. And we saw over the last 3 years, where the industry had faced an economic turmoil in the Eurozone, where the ad market, online ad market, was fairly mature in large markets such as the UK and in Scandinavia, we still saw double-digit growth. Over the last 3 years, online advertising grew around 10% year after year. So there shows that there is a lot of organic growth industry, even in mature markets. It shows that the online industry has improved through technology, to kind of cleaning up standards, through successfully bringing brand advertising into the medium, and so forth. This has driven growth, and we see that industry, despite issues of what we see now, ad fraud, viewability, and so forth, has grown out of itself. And if it remains as it is, we forecast a kind of high single-digit growth to continue until 2020 and just the end of our forecast period at IHS. Yeah, you mentioned that, Tony. Bigger will come in the future as the challenge of, indeed, regulation. We see a growing proportion of advertising being moved to data-driven models, which rely on first-party data, third-party data, which rely on the processing of data for purpose for which the data wasn't necessarily intended to. And we see that this is something that could significantly impact the growth of online advertising in Europe. We're also at a stage now in Europe where markets are in particular in mid-tier markets, are too small to absorb further growth. Online advertising, despite the fact that we have some extremely high value inventory, is predominantly scale business. If you look at how the majority of revenues is generated, and the scale requires data as well. But currently, there isn't really a pan-European market, and beyond national boundaries, working together data, by the insight, and creating an infrastructure for transnational ad spend is going to be key for those markets. And I think the term transnational is something that might not resonate well with this audience. I believe it's something that Europe has looked at over I think at least the last 6 years that we've been working together. The idea of transnational has always again. So in some sense, yes, the current regulation is one of the key threats to online advertising, and the industry itself has been quite good at actually keeping to grow, despite issues that it had. I would say so that there is another thing within the industry that is hindering growth, and that is kind of the move of advertising from the line advertising or just interruptive advertising to branded content. We see a growing proportion of spend being taken out of the traditional running in channels, being taken out of what running and buy agencies do to brand content, bespoke content investments, and so forth, and also the relationships of brands towards this changing. What needs to happen here to continue growth is to create an infrastructure of measurements and standards. Because it's still in an incredibly fragmented industry where the investment in content often isn't clear. So I think the ad industry needs to try to reconcile advertising and branded content and improve its measurement in that way.
Okay, we're easing over time. I have one more question I wanted to answer because it's really goes to the heart of why we did this. So I have a question about how we're going to, what the next steps are, how we're going to use the results and of the study politically. Because as you know, everyone agreed outside the audience for this work was really intended to be national and EU level policymakers and influencers. So I think that we can't, we're not going to be able to sit down a huge policy-making audience to listen to a 25-minute explanation of the derivation of the figures. As I said at the beginning, you know, this is intended to be a calling card. This is, you know, in a few infographics and a few numbers, a snapshot of what our industry is currently contributing to the European economy. So there will be this needs to be a part of all of our policy outreach for the next 6 months, for the next year. So we'll have different tools to enable all of you guys to do that alongside us. So there will be the paper. There will be there will be a slide deck that will be with notes that will make it easy for people to deliver just the high-level figures. We'll have a dashboard with just the key graphs, key infographics. And all this will be communicated to you guys over the next few days. Next week with the release, we'll have a press release and you know, some blogs going forward, all the social media outreach, all the, you know, normal communication stuff around the immediate launch. And I think it just has to be an integrated part of every single private, you know, bilateral, multilateral, you know, public speaking opportunity that any of us who is involved in the policy outreach is engaged in over the next year. And but I would also look to the national IABs and the company members who are on the call for you know, other ideas about how it can be used. We will present it also at an EDAA summit, the first EDAA summit that's taking place on the 1st of December in Brussels, and at which there is a cabinet, chef de cabinet, I think, from the ANSIP, Commissioner ANSIP cabinet. And so I think it's just got to be integrated, woven into all of our external speaking and policy outreach over the next year. So 3 minutes over. Thanks very much to Daniel for all the good work and for the nice explanation, and to everyone who attended. And there will be more information sent out, as we said, as from Monday morning. Thanks. Bye bye.